The prairie wind carried the scent of iron and ash that day, as if the land itself remembered a blood-stained hour and refused to let the memory fade. Elias Cutter stood at the edge of his pasture, one boot resting on the bottom rail of the fence he built with his own blistered hands, watching the horizon split with a strange glint, too sharp for sunlight, too steady for lightning. He narrowed his eyes beneath the brim of a sweat-stained hat. Something was out there, and it didn't belong. He'd spent 10 years learning what belonged. Cattle, dust, storm, silence. He knew the taste of all four. What he didn't know anymore was people. They came with needs, noise, memories, things he'd buried long ago in the red earth behind his shack. The wind shifted again. This time it brought the low, distant moan of splintered wood. By the time Elias saddled his mule and reached the ridge, the stagecoach had already given up its ghost. The horses lay crumpled in the gulch like discarded prayers, ribs split from a crash. One wheel still turned slowly in the wind, creaking like a rocking chair in an empty room. A scorched trunk was split open, its contents scattered: lace, a broken music box, a child's bonnet. Wrong things. Things that didn't make sense here. And then he saw her, half buried beneath the coach's fallen side, a woman's form, still, except for the trembling in her hands. She was black, her dress tattered and clinging to her frame like wet leaves, her legs bare and scraped raw. A welt bloomed purple along her temple. Her lips moved faintly, though no sound came out. A thick trickle of dried blood traced from her ear to her jawline. He moved slow, not because he was afraid, but because she deserved that much. He knelt beside her, the dust already settling on her skin like the earth was trying to claim her. "You hear me?" he asked, voice low, rasping from disuse. "You alive in there?" Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he saw nothing in them. Then panic. Then fire. She reached for something that wasn't there. Her fingers clenched at air. "Easy," he said. "Ain't here to hurt you." She tried to speak, but only managed to sound like a cracked whisper. He leaned in. She said a name, one that wasn't his. Not a plea, not a warning. Just a name. Like she was afraid it'd disappear if she didn't say it out loud. Elias checked for wounds. Ribs seemed unbroken. No spine damage, he could tell. But she was fading. He slid his arms under her carefully. She weighed less than she should have. As he stood, cradling her against his chest, her head lolled toward his shoulder, and she whispered again, softer this time, "Don't send me back." He didn't know what that meant, but he didn't ask. Some things a man just carries. The rain came as they crossed the flats. Not a downpour, more like the land was weeping in its sleep. Elias trudged forward, mule trailing behind. The woman pressed against him as if she could disappear through skin and bone. The wind bit at his face. He ignored it. By the time he reached his shack, night had crawled over the hills. The fire he lit cast long shadows on the wooden walls, dancing over the faded photograph of a boy in uniform. Long gone, never coming back. Elias laid the woman gently on the cot, covering her with the one quilt he hadn't sold. He studied her face in the firelight, dirt-streaked, blood-matted hair curled along her cheek. Her lips were cracked, but there was a strength there. Even in sleep, her jaw was set like someone waiting for a fight. He found a letter in her satchel, folded neat, tore along the edge like it had been opened too many times. No envelope, just two initials at the bottom, asterisk, asterisk, JC, asterisk, asterisk. The ink had smudged from water, but the words were still legible enough to read what it was. A contract of sorts, a marriage arrangement. A man from Calico Bluff had paid for a bride. Elias folded the paper and tucked it back. The next morning, the town buzzed with news of the wreck. Sheriff Trumbull rode up to Elias's gate with that look he always wore when trouble smelled like outsiders. He didn't dismount. "She's one of the mail-order types, I hear," Trumbull said, chewing a twig like it might hide the sour in his mouth. "Black gal, not from around here. Likely meant for that rancher out west. Boone. Except Boone says he never met her. You sure she ain't part of something crooked?" Elias didn't answer at first, just stared at the sheriff until the man shifted in his saddle. "She was hurt. Coach flipped." Elias said, "She's staying until she's better." Trumbull spat into the dust. That don't sit well with folks. It don't need to. The sheriff rode off without another word, but the silence he left behind was loud. It hung around town like a scent, foul, persistent, unspoken. Elias didn't care. He'd long since stopped trying to explain himself to men who never saw war, but still acted like they'd earned the right to judge who lived and who got buried. 2 nights later, she woke. She didn't scream, just opened her eyes and looked around like she expected someone else to be there. When she saw Elias, she stared a long while before finally speaking. "Where am I?" "Out past Dead Man's Ridge. Closest thing to shelter this side of the pass," he said. She sat up slowly, pain flickering in her features. "I found you near what's left of the stagecoach," he added. "Thought you were dead." "I was close." He handed her water. She drank like it hurt, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I'm Naomi," she said. No last name. No offer of more. "Elias." They sat in silence. Outside, the wind knocked dry branches against the house. She looked toward the window, eyes distant. "Was there anyone else?" she asked. Coach was empty. Baggage was picked over. Might have been robbed before the crash. She said nothing for a while, just stared into the fire like she was watching something only she could see. Finally, she spoke again. "I wasn't supposed to be on that coach." Elias waited, but I had nowhere else to go. A shadow passed over her face, and Elias felt something twist in his gut. Not pity, he didn't believe in that. Something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone running from something too big to name. She leaned back against the wall, and for the first time, her voice softened. "You saved me." He didn't respond. Didn't know how. Instead, he stood and fed the fire one more log. Outside, the wind picked up again. This time, it brought a different scent. One Elias hadn't smelled in years. Gun oil. Saddle sweat. Smoke. He walked to the window and looked out across the prairie. In the far distance, just beyond the hills, a shape moved against the moonlight. A rider. Watching. The pass had found them. It always did. Naomi moved through Elias's shack like someone learned to breathe in a new body. Each step was careful, almost reverent, like the floorboards might betray her. Her ankles still swelled at dusk, but she never complained. She only winced when she thought he wasn't looking. The days came slow and warm, wrapped in the kind of silence most folks fear but Elias welcomed. He watched her from the porch some mornings as she hung wet linens on the line, her fingers nimble despite the bruises. She hummed under her breath. Old field songs worn down to a hum, notes carrying 8 between syllables. Elias never asked the words. Some things weren't meant to be spoken where they could be stolen. She never said who she'd been promised to, and Elias didn't press. All he knew was that some man out there had ordered a bride and never come to claim her, or worse, had tried to claim too much. The wreckage told enough of that story in its own cruel handwriting. Naomi found a rhythm quickly. She swept dust from corners he hadn't noticed in years. Cooked meals that reminded Elias of places he'd only passed through. The shack began to smell of cornbread and stew instead of wet timber and tobacco. One evening, she mended his frayed coat without asking, threading needle through cloth by firelight. "You always as kind to strays?" she asked as she sewed. Elias sipped his coffee. "You ain't a stray." She looked up, one brow arched. "Then what am I?" He didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because the words felt too heavy to lift just yet. Some nights she'd talk. Not much, but enough. She spoke of Georgia summers and creek water cold on bare feet, of a mother who braided her hair and sang to the moon when grief got too thick, of the man who'd promised a better life out west, one with a name to share and land to build on. She never mentioned his face, only that he had callous hands and spoke with the kind of gentleness wolves use before they bite. Elias listened. He didn't offer sympathy, just space. It was all he had to give. One afternoon, she asked to walk to town. He hesitated, but agreed. Calico Bluff was no kind place for strangers, especially not ones who didn't know their place according to the men who thought they'd built the map. Still, Naomi held her head high as they rode in, wrapped in a blue shawl and silence sharp as a blade. The first stairs came before they'd hit the main street. A woman at the mercantile crossed herself. Two boys stopped throwing pebbles and just watched, wide-eyed. At the saloon, a drunk muttered something Elias didn't catch, but Naomi did. Her fingers tightened around the reins, though her face didn't flinch. They stopped at the postmaster's. She claimed a package that hadn't arrived, knowing it never would. Outside, a man waited, broad-shouldered, sun-scarred, with a grin like wrought behind white teeth. Silas Boone. He tipped his hat at Naomi. Heard a mail-order bride went missing. Thought maybe she found herself in the wrong man's bed. Elias stepped between them. Move along, Silas. Boone's eyes never left Naomi. Just curious. Ain't it strange, Cutter, how things fall into your lap these days? Naomi spoke, voice calm but coiled. Strange how men talk like they own what they never earned. Boone laughed low and walked off, spitting dust in his wake. On the ride home, neither of them spoke. The wind pushed hard through the canyon, as if trying to chase them back. That night, Naomi stood by the fire, her back to Elias, hands resting on the mantel. I lied to you, she said. He said nothing, just waited. I wasn't supposed to be on that stagecoach. Not really. I paid a girl for her papers. Took her place. Elias's jaw tightened. Why? Because the man who sent for me wasn't a husband. He was a buyer. And I was raised by a woman who swore her daughter would never wear chains, not even gold ones. Elias stepped closer. The fire cast her shadow long across the floor. He know where you went, he asked. He will. She turned then, and for the first time there was steel in her eyes. Not just hurt. I didn't run to be safe. I ran to be free. There's a difference. Elias nodded, understanding more than he let on. Later, as thunder rolled faint along the edge of the hills, Naomi sat on the porch, arms folded around herself. Elias joined her, the two of them framed in silence and moonlight. She glanced sideways. You ever do something you ain't proud of just to stay alive? Elias stared out over the fields, the dark grass swaying like the backs of cattle too far gone to herd. Yeah, he said, more than once. Naomi tilted her head. And does it still wake you? Only when I sleep too deep. She nodded. Then maybe we ain't so different. The next morning, Naomi didn't speak much. She spent hours kneeling by the garden plot that had never grown right, working her fingers into the dry soil as if it owed her something. Elias watched from inside, the smell of coffee growing bitter on the stovetop. By midday, she handed him something, a medallion, copper worn down to a soft shine. Found it buried out back, she said, near the fence. He turned it over, a Union insignia, faded but still legible. His voice caught before he could speak. She noticed. Yours. He shook his head slowly. No, but I knew the man it belonged to. Naomi stared at him, unmoving. Who was he? Elias didn't answer. He just closed his fingers around the medallion and walked back into the house. That night, Naomi didn't sleep. Neither did Elias. There was something shifting between them now, no longer just a comfort of shared quiet, but a tension pulling the threads of who they were before they met. Elias sat at the edge of his bed long after midnight, staring at the folded letter in his hand, the one from her satchel signed J.C., the same initials stamped faintly on the back of the medallion. Something was unraveling, slow as a knife being drawn from its sheath. Out in the darkness, a dog barked once, then went silent, and on the far ridge, beneath the veil of stars, another rider waited, watching. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and memory when Naomi left the shack before dawn. She didn't leave a note, didn't pack a bag, just stepped barefoot into the dust, wrapped her shawl tight, and disappeared down the path that wound past the ridge. Elias woke to find the door swinging open, her quilt folded neatly at the foot of the cot. For a moment, he stood still, letting the silence press against his ribs like a hand on a wound. He found her behind the church, kneeling at a mound of earth unmarked by any stone. The cemetery was old, some grave sunk so deep the headboards had rotted into dust. But Naomi knelt at a fresh one. Only a few months old, the dirt still settled uneven. You shouldn't be here, Elias said gently. Naomi didn't look at him. Her fingers pressed into the soil, slow and deliberate. They'd buried him here, in a borrowed grave. No marker, no name. He stepped closer, boots crunching dry twigs. Who? My father. Her voice was flat, a chisel against rock. Jonas Calloway, Sergeant, Union Army. Buried like a criminal on a land he helped free. The name struck Elias like a hammer to the chest. He hadn't heard it aloud in a decade, but it had never truly left him. Jonas Calloway, the man who bled beside him in a ravine outside Vicksburg, who'd taken a bullet meant for Elias and laughed while doing it. Calloway had been the kind of man who turned pain into prophecy. A firebrand, a teacher, a father. Naomi rose slowly, brushing dirt from her knees, and turned to face him. The shawl slipped from her shoulders, revealing the necklace she always kept tucked beneath her blouse, a brass ring on a leather cord. He remembered that ring. He'd seen Calloway wear it in camp, twisting it absently between his fingers when the nights were long and the sky too quiet. You knew him? Naomi said. Not a question. Elias nodded. He was the best man I ever followed. And you let them kill him. Her words came like cold steel, deliberate and sharp. I tried to stop it. But you didn't. Elias didn't answer. The truth hung between them, thick as thunder. He'd been there when it happened, when command fed the colored regiment false orders, sent them straight into an ambush, and left the survivors to die in silence. He'd ridden through the trees, screaming warnings too late. When he found Calloway, the man had already been bleeding out, whispering a name, Naomi. I buried that day, Elias said, voice rough. Buried it deep. Naomi's hands curled into fists. I didn't come west to be saved. I came to find out if the man who let my father die was still breathing. He looked at her then, not as the wounded woman from the stagecoach, not as a stranger, but as someone born from fire, walking the same scorched earth he did. There was no hate in her eyes, only the weight of everything she carried. So what now? He asked. Naomi's gaze didn't waver. Now I decide what to do with a man who gave me back my life without knowing he once took the only one that mattered. The wind shifted. Somewhere behind them, a church bell rang, hollow and cracked, a sound made more of memory than metal. That night, Elias sat alone by the fire, the medallion in his palm, the letter on the table. He read it again. To the man who will take her in, she is more than what this world has made her. Protect her if you can. The signature was blurred, but the heart of it burned clear. Outside, the prairie rustled like it was holding its breath. Naomi hadn't come home. He didn't sleep. By morning, the air was thick with the taste of gun oil and sweat. Tracks led away from the house. Hoof prints in the dust, too many to count. He followed them west, through dry gulches and creeks, until he saw the smoke. Boone's camp, tent stretched out beneath the canyon ridge, half built like a rotting tooth in the earth. Boone sat at the fire, boots kicked up, hat low over his eyes. Naomi was there, wrists tied, a split lip and blood on her collar. Elias didn't wait for warning. He moved like wind through a wheat field, silent, sure lethal. You always did like taking what wasn't yours, Boone said without looking up. She's not yours either, Elias growled. Boone stood, slowly, fingers twitching near his belt. You think she's different? He said. You think she don't got blood like the rest of us? Her daddy died for not knowing when to stay quiet. Maybe you'll learn from that. Elias pulled the medallion from his pocket and tossed it in the dirt between them. Boone's eyes flicked to it. You still carrying ghosts, Cutter? I reckon they carry me. Naomi didn't speak. Her eyes met Elias's, calm even as blood trickled down her cheek. Boone drew first. But Elias was already moving. The world narrowed into thunder and smoke, the scream of iron and flesh. Gunshots echoed off the canyon walls like the past trying to claw its way forward. When the dust settled, Boone lay gasping in the dirt, blood spilling through his fingers. You don't get to bury anyone else, Elias said. He cut Naomi's binds. She didn't cry, just stood, walked over to Boone, and took back the letter he'd stolen. Then, without a word, she set fire to his tent. Flames licked the sky, bright against the dawn. By the time they reached the ridge again, Naomi's hands were shaking. "You came back," she said. "I never left," he replied. They stood in silence, watching the fire burn the lies down to ash. Naomi looked up at him, voice low. "Maybe you weren't there to save my father, but you saved me." Elias looked out over the land, dry, stubborn, scarred. "I ain't finished yet," he said. And in the distance, as the flames died and the sun rose, a new shape emerged on the horizon. A lone rider coming fast, dust trailing behind. The past wasn't done with them. Not yet. The rider on the horizon didn't slow. Dust rose behind him like the ghost of war, clinging to the heat-struck morning. Elias and Naomi watched from the bluff as the figure cut across the plain, straight and unflinching, the way men rode when they didn't come to talk. Elias reached for his rifle, the motion slow, practiced, inevitable. Naomi said nothing, only adjusted the scarf around her neck and stepped beside him, her shoulders square, her jaw set. There was no fear in her, just the weight of what had not yet come. When the rider finally reached them, he dismounted in one fluid motion, boots landing in dust like stones dropped in still water. He was younger than Elias expected, no more than 30, but something about his eyes had the weight of older sins. He looked at Naomi first, then Elias. "Name's Corbin," he said. "You killed my cousin." Elias didn't blink. "Then your cousin was Boone." Corbin nodded once. "I come to collect what's owed." Naomi stepped forward. "Nothing's owed. What you're riding for is already buried in the canyon, and he earned every inch of that dirt." Corbin's gaze didn't waver. Doesn't change a man's bloodline. Elias could feel it building, the silence before thunder, the dust before the stampede. He knew the rhythm of death too well. Corbin wasn't here for justice. He was here to continue the pattern. That long, bitter loop of power, vengeance, and name. "You want to bury someone else," Elias said, voice low. "That it? I came because men like you think you can rewrite what's been written in blood." Naomi took a slow step forward, her voice calm as coiled rope. "Then write this down, Corbin. My father's name was Jonas Calloway. He was murdered by his own command. Boone tried to sell me like cattle. And this man," she said, nodding to Elias, "this man gave me back what y'all tried to steal." Corbin's mouth twitched, but he said nothing. "I ain't hiding," Elias said. "But you best understand, if you raise steel today, you won't leave with it." The wind shifted. Corbin stared at them both, weighing something older than hate. Then he spat into the dirt, turned, and mounted his horse. Without a word, he rode off, vanishing into the same dust he came from. Elias let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Naomi watched the horizon until even the dust was gone. "That's not the last of it," she said. "No," Elias replied, "but it's the first one we didn't have to kill." That evening, the sun dropped heavy behind the hills, casting long gold fingers across the valley. Naomi stood by the half-built fence, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled past her elbows. Sweat traced lines down her forearm, darkening the cotton at her collar. Elias came to her side, carrying a pail of nails. "You don't have to finish all this tonight," he said. She glanced at him. "I do." He didn't ask why. Some burdens got lighter the more you struck wood with steel. As the fence rose, so did the rhythm between them. Not spoken, not planned, just shared motion. His hand steadied when hers slipped. Her shoulders loosened when it stiffened. By the time the moon climbed high, they had a gate. Not perfect, not pretty, but strong. Inside the shack, Naomi laid the last of her old papers on the table. The forged bride contract, the false name, the lie that brought her west. She lit a match and dropped it. The flames curled the edges, then took the rest. Elias watched in silence as the fire consumed what had once threatened to consume her. "I want a name that's mine," she said. He nodded. "Then build it with me." The next morning, Elias rode into town alone. He posted a sign at the saloon door, bold letters burned into pine. "Boone's debts are paid. There'll be no more taking. Asterisk, asterisk." Some spat at it. One tried to tear it down, but Elias stood behind it until the man backed away. Word spread fast. Cutter had drawn a line, and no one was ready to cross it. Back at the ridge, Naomi cleared the weeds around the old grave. She knelt in the dirt, carved 3 letters into the wood with her knife. JC, then below it, smaller, father, soldier, free, asterisk, asterisk. She wiped her hands and stood. When Elias returned, she met him with a quiet smile and a question in her eyes. Town still breathing? She asked. For now, he said. That night, they sat on the porch as coyotes called in the distance. The wind was softer than it had been in weeks. The fire crackled low beside them, casting shadows across the fields where nothing had grown in years. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of wood, smooth, whittled, a sign. He handed it to her. Carved across the grain were 2 words, Callaway Ridge. Naomi ran her fingers over the letters, slow and deliberate. I thought you didn't name things, she said. Some things earn it. She didn't cry, just sat a little closer, until their shoulders touched. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. In the months that followed, the fence grew longer. The shack grew taller. The land, stubborn as it was, began to bloom. Folks who once turned away now came with quiet questions and baskets of seed. Naomi taught children to read from the back of the old barn. Elias learned to laugh again, not loud, but real. And sometimes, when the night was quiet and the fire low, he'd wake to find her standing at the window, watching the horizon, always watching. Because freedom isn't something you win once. It's something you defend over and over in silence and in flame. And somewhere beyond the ridge, another rider waits. But not tonight. Tonight, they rest.